Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Theme Park Society, a place where we talk about guest experiences in our favorite destinations. If you are a regular listener, you hear us talk about Hershey Park and Hershey, Pennsylvania on a regular basis. But on today's episode, we are going to talk about the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida, and we could not be more excited. If you are watching this video on our YouTube with in-park visuals, please feel free to subscribe to our channel if this video brings value to you. If you are listening to this episode as a podcast, we would like to ask that you would please subscribe to our show on whatever platform you are listening to this episode on, and then find us on Instagram to virtually join us in the parks throughout the year. With that being said, sit back, relax, and let us bring the magic to you. We are so excited for this episode because even though we consider ourselves Walt Disney World regulars, we have not yet posted any in-depth episodes about Walt Disney World. But that changes today, because today we are looking at Disney's value resorts, and we are giving you 10 reasons why you should consider a value resort for your next trip to Walt Disney World. Stay tuned because number 10 is a bit unexpected, but you're going to have to trust me on that one. If you are tuning into this episode, chances are you are at least somewhat familiar with the value resorts at Walt Disney World, but for everybody's sake, let's just quickly go over the value resorts so we're at least on the same page here. Walt Disney World has many different resorts to choose from, but they are most easily broken down into 3 categories, and those categories are deluxe, moderate, and value. Now, value resorts are typically the most budget-friendly resorts. However, prices do fluctuate throughout the year. But if you are looking to do Disney on a budget, you may find that the value resorts are going to fit into your price points, and they will typically be the lowest price resorts that Disney has to offer year-round. You may have heard something about the Good Neighbor hotels, which are typically located around the Disney Springs area and do offer some of the amenities you'd expect to find in a Disney resort. However, they are not owned and operated by Disney, and we are not going to be talking about those properties today. Today, we are focusing on Disney's value resorts, and we are staying in the Disney bubble, if you will. So, which of the Disney resorts are considered value resorts? Well, we have a few here. All-Star Movies, All-Star Music, and All-Star Sports are the first 3. And these 3 are typically the lowest prices of all of the Disney resorts. You will commonly hear these 3 resorts spoken about as if they were all one large resort. They do all share the same plot of land as well as countless similarities between the 3, but they do all have their own lobbies, gift shops, arcades, pools, food courts, and more. But we will look into all of that a little bit later in this episode. The next value resort on property would be Disney's Pop Century Resort, which neighbors the 4th and final value resort, Art of Animation, which typically tends to be the most expensive value resort, but again, more on that later in this episode. So now that we've covered which resorts fall into the value category at Walt Disney World, let's get into some of the reasons you should consider a value resort for your next trip. I'm just going to get this one out of the way because it's the most obvious, but reason number 1 is going to be pricing. Let's put this into perspective though, because there is a huge difference in pricing out a value resort versus a deluxe and sometimes even a moderate resort. I picked a random day in the middle of the summer and took a look at resort pricing for that specific day, and I decided to contrast the value pricing against some of the more expensive resorts. One thing we need to consider, however, is the fact that resort pricing changes based on many different factors. But in running a simple test, you'll quickly see that you can potentially save hundreds of dollars a night when staying at a value resort versus a deluxe. So if budgeting is a priority in your Disney vacation, the value resorts will be your best friend. This is where you may start to consider what the pricing can do for you. Maybe booking a value resort is your key to staying on property multiple times a year. Maybe it's your key to staying on property just once. But whatever it is for you, the value resorts are a great option for saving money while staying in the Disney bubble. I've stayed in value resorts multiple times a year, and I've even done split stays between deluxe and value resorts. That is something else to consider. Maybe you think about splitting your stay between a deluxe or a moderate and then moving half of the stay to a value resort so that you can visit multiple parks and stay within your budget. You know, Any way you want to do it, you're going to be saving tons of money, potentially hundreds of dollars a night, by staying at a value resort versus a deluxe or moderate. So right off the bat, you are able to budget a bit easier when staying at a value resort. While we're on the topic of pricing, I do want to mention that while Pop Century is usually more expensive than the All-Stars, it does tend to be more in line with the All-Star pricing, while Art of Animation can commonly hover around moderate to sometimes even deluxe pricing. Art of Animation does tend to cater to larger families and guests who want themed rooms, but we'll talk more about that later. So now that we've gone over the broad pricing perspective, let's touch on one more interesting price perspective, and then we will move into other reasons that do not take price into consideration. So reason number 2 for considering a value resort is paid extras in the parks. If you book a value resort, you will not be spending as much money on the resort, and hopefully this leaves you with extra money for other aspects of the trip. Disney World has tons of paid extras, and I'm even talking about table service dining options. Some of these table services can get pretty expensive, but saving money on the resort may allow you to get into some of the most sought-after restaurants on property. If this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip for you, you may want to consider making more memories in the parks rather than at the resort. Maybe you've always dreamed of eating at Cinderella's Royal Table, which is the table service restaurant located in the castle at Magic Kingdom, or maybe you want to spend some money on some of the neat experiences in Disney Springs. Either way, if you are like me and you like to budget and save money, the resort may be a good place to do so, and you can spend the saved money elsewhere throughout Disney property. Let's move away from pricing and let's get into some of the other reasons that you should consider a value resort for your next trip to Walt Disney World. Reason number 3 is over-the-top Disney theming. All of the value resorts on property have larger-than-life Disney theming. We're talking character statues as tall as the buildings, beautiful colors throughout the resort, movie-themed pools at Art of Animation, and so much more. These resorts place you in the Disney bubble, and they do not let you forget that you are there. Now, the rooms themselves are all very modern and clean, and do have some Disney touches throughout, but the theming in the rooms is nothing compared to the theming throughout the resort property. Earlier, I did mention themed rooms at Art of Animation, and this is going to be one of the exceptions to the in-room theming because Art of Animation rooms are going to be a lot more Disney themed than the other value resorts. At Art of Animation, you will find family suites themed after Cars, Finding Nemo, and The Lion King, and then you'll find standard rooms themed after The Little Mermaid. Now again, Art of Animation typically comes with moderate pricing for the family suites, but again, this is where you will see the most Disney theming in any of the resorts. Walking around any value resort property, you are immediately immersed in Disney, and it's a great way to pull your trip together. You still feel immersed in the Disney bubble when you leave the park, and you will still have Disney theming to look forward to when you get back to your resort. Now, don't get me wrong here. There are definitely parts of the value resort properties where you can walk around without seeing anything Disney, but again, the theming here is really larger than life and is a great way to pull your Disney trip together both in the parks and at your resort. So there's reason number 3, incredible Disney theming. Let's look at the 4th reason you should consider a value resort for your next trip, and that is going to be traveling with kids in your party. The value resorts shine when it comes to traveling with families of all ages. For example, All-Star Sports Resort is a great resort to travel with your young ones who might have a lot of energy throughout the trip. The reason I say this is because there is a large green field right in the center of the resort, and it is a wonderful place for your children to get their energy out. The value resort rooms are motel-style entry, and by that I simply mean that the room's entry is outside rather than inside a hotel hallway. The reason that this can be helpful when traveling with children is simply due to the fact that keeping voices down is a little less of a priority when you're outside versus when you're inside a hotel hallway. Again, don't get me wrong here, I am not telling you to let your children yell at the top of their lungs as soon as they leave the room, but what I am saying is that the sound has a lot more room to move outside than it does in a tight hotel hallway. So this can be a little bit less stressful for parents who are trying to keep the volume down outside of other guest rooms. Here's the thing. We are all super excited when we wake up for the day and leave our rooms as we're headed for a park. But you can definitely let the energy out a little bit easier when you leave your room and you are immediately outside rather than in a resort hallway. Another thing to this point is the fact that kids love the pool at Art of Animation. I am talking about the big blue pool, which is the Finding Nemo themed pool. It is massive. In fact, it is the largest pool on Disney property, so this is a great reason to consider this value resort when traveling with your family. All of the value resorts have multiple pools, but the pools at Art of Animation really stand out as phenomenal pools. So there is reason number 4. The value resorts are great for traveling with families of all ages, especially children. Moving on to reason number 5, and this one includes a park. Reason number 5 that you should consider a value resort is the fact that they are close to Disney's Animal Kingdom. Now, this reason may not apply to everyone because being close to Animal Kingdom means that you are far away from the other parks. We will be talking about transportation at the value resorts a little bit later in this episode because we want to consider the fact that the Skyliner does service 2 of the value resorts, but Animal Kingdom is a bus-only park, aside from driving and rideshare services, of course. Animal Kingdom is one of my favorite parks, and I love the fact that the value resorts are so close by, especially when we are talking about the All-Star resorts, but Pop Century and Art of Animation are also very close to Animal Kingdom. Animal Kingdom opens earlier than the other parks, so it's definitely nice to have such a short bus ride if you plan on rope dropping a park that early in the morning, especially if the buses are busy when you leave your resort. Additionally, the All-Star resorts are super close to Disney's Blizzard Beach Water Park, which is also the same parking lot for the Winter Summerland Golf Course. So if mini golf is something that interests you, then you can add the value resorts location to reason number 5. All right, friends, let's take a look at reason number 6 you should consider a value resort for your next trip to Walt Disney World. This is an interesting one, but I happen to like this one. The value resorts offer the most Disney photo opportunities of any Disney resort. Let me clarify with this one. What I mean is you can get the most unmistakably Disney-themed photos of you and your family at these resorts. Whether you are standing in front of one of the many larger-than-life statues around the resort, or you are sitting down next to one of the Cars character statues at Art of Animation, you will easily be showcasing the fact that you are indeed on Disney property. The colors around these resorts are just so vibrant that they make for some really incredible photo opportunities throughout the entire property. You can get great selfies, great family photos, and just overall great photo angles around the resort. If I had to choose my favorite value resort for awesome Disney photography, I would definitely say Art of Animation as it is the most Disney themed, but they are all great for immersive photo opportunities. I will say this, not too many people resort hop to the value resorts, so the resort grounds tend to be pretty quiet during the middle of the day when everyone else is out at the parks or resort hopping elsewhere. So the quiet resort grounds make for some pretty easy photography. Moving on to reason number 7, and this is a big one. Now, this one only applies to 2 of the value resorts, Pop Century and Art of Animation, but reason 7 is use of the Disney Skyliner. If you are not familiar with the Disney Skyliner, it is Disney's newest form of transportation, which is a gondola lift system that takes you around Disney property and gives you some incredible aerial views of Walt Disney World. The Skyliner has 5 stations throughout Disney property, and one of those stations is shared by both Pop Century and Art of Animation. You can use the Skyliner to get from either of these resorts to either Epcot or Hollywood Studios. It is super efficient and it's incredibly fun. There are a few other resorts on property that do have Skyliner access, but I was super happy to see 2 value resorts included in the Skyliner access. I've stayed at Pop Century multiple times, and I can tell you that the Skyliner is a huge game changer when it comes to early morning transportation. The Skyliner will get you to the park quickly, but honestly, I sometimes wish the ride was a little bit longer considering how incredible some of the views are. Having Skyliner access at these two resorts is definitely something to consider when booking your next trip. Like I said earlier, Pop Century and Art of Animation do share this one Skyliner station. It is essentially on the bridge that connects the two resorts, and both resorts are pretty large, so you could potentially have a long walk to the Skyliner station depending on where your room is in either resort. But like I said, it is an efficient system, so you'll be in a gondola pretty quick upon arrival to the station. Let's look at reason number 8, and this one is titled Multiple Resorts in One. What I am referring to is the fact that the All-Star Resorts are all on the same plot of land. I mentioned this earlier, but some people refer to the All-Star Resorts as one resort, which has its truth, but it is also not entirely the case. They are 3 separate resorts with their own designated lobbies, pools, food courts, gift shops, and more. They do all have similarities in the food they serve, as well as the amenities, but the theming does differ between the 3, and there is a walkway connecting all 3. So you may have some interest in taking a little walk on a non-park day. Here is a little tip though. They do often share the same buses, so you will have an advantage if you stay at All-Star Sports, which happens to be my favorite of the 3 All-Stars. The reason you may have a transportation advantage at All-Star Sports is the fact that it is the first in line, meaning that this resort will have the first pickup and the first drop-off when shared buses are in use. This means you and the other All-Star Sports guests will be the first picked up on empty buses when heading to the parks or Disney Springs. And this also means that you will be the first stop when you are returning to your resort after a long day in the parks. So do keep that in mind. All-Star Sports has the advantage with the bus transportation. There's been times where I've stayed at one of the All-Stars, but my room was so far away from my designated lobby that it was actually closer to the neighboring All-Star Resorts lobby, so I just used the walkway to utilize the resort lobby that was closer. It definitely saved some time, and it was kind of like staying at 2 resorts at once, which is kind of interesting. Now, of course, I had to use my designated lobby and front desk for check-in, check-out, payments, things like that. But once you get your room, you can then figure out which of the 3 All-Star lobbies is closest to your room, and you can start using that lobby for transportation, the food court, and pretty much anything else that's in there aside from the administration and front desk type stuff. Now, as for the other 2 value resorts, Pop Century and Art of Animation, you do have this carry over in a similar sense, but it is going to be a little bit different. You are going to be able to use the neighboring food courts, and you can walk the grounds and things like that, but you are not going to be able to use the pools at Art of Animation if you are staying at Pop. It is required that you are staying at Art of Animation if you are going to use those pools. So take a look at the pools and amenities at Art of Animation because you may want to just consider booking at that resort. Let's move on to the last 2 reasons you should consider staying at a value resort for your next trip. Number 9 is the fact that you may not feel like you're missing out as much if you spend all day in the parks. Here's the thing. The deluxe resorts are wonderful. Let's take Animal Kingdom Lodge, for example. The last time I stayed at the Animal Kingdom Lodge, I made sure that I had more than enough time to really explore the resort and enjoy the amenities. There is so much to do at these deluxe resorts, and if you neglect to plan an allotted time for these resorts, you may feel like you are missing out on something that you paid for. So while I do love the deluxe resorts, and I can give you a million reasons to stay at one, you might want to consider a value if you plan on spending all day, every day in the parks. Let's say you have a weekend trip planned and you want to maximize your time in the parks, so you decide to rope drop to park close every day. This leaves little time and little energy to really explore and enjoy your resort. This is where value resorts shine because you are still in the Disney bubble, you still have access to the Disney transportation, and you are able to spend all day in the parks without feeling like you are paying for a resort experience you do not have time to enjoy. Value resorts should be a huge consideration for someone who wants to stay in the Disney bubble but spend most of their time in the parks and at Disney Springs. Besides, the value resorts are great. I love each and every one of them, so definitely consider them all. All right, so we have arrived at reason number 10, which I promised would be a strange one, but hear me out on this one. Reason 10 you should consider staying at a value resort is its close proximity to off-property amenities. You might be wondering why I am saying this after talking about the so-called Disney bubble this entire episode, but here's the thing. You need to consider pre-trip, post-trip, and then unexpected mid-trip. Let's start with the pre-trip. Most of my trips to Florida are taken by a car, so before check-in, I like to head to the Walmart right outside of Disney, and there I will grab a bunch of beverages, snacks from my room, and things of that nature. It's a great pre-trip run, and I get everything I think I'll need before checking in. Typically, this shopping trip saves me from having to leave the Disney bubble once I check in. After a quick run to the store, it's a few-minute drive to the value resorts. I check in and we're good to go. But if something does arise mid-trip, I am still close by. It would not be a huge venture to quickly leave property and pick up an essential item if I needed to, but the closer to the amenities I am, the easier and quicker the run will be. What about post-trip though? Having these off-property amenities so close makes for quick stops before I start my long drive back home. Whether it be the gas station, fast food, or something like that, I am close by once leaving a value resort. There are a couple of gas stations on Disney property that I have used before, but typically I do not drive around property unless I am changing resorts during a split stay, which I do that on occasion. Once my car is parked at the resort, I rely solely on Disney transportation, which just reminded me of a bonus reason to stay at the value resorts, and that is parking is cheaper. I guess this doesn't apply to the majority of resort guests because a lot of people fly in, but anyway, it is an additional benefit, so there you go, have that one for free. And speaking of close proximity to non-Disney amenities, there is actually a McDonald's right down the street from the All-Star Sports Resorts. It is still technically Disney property. It is the most interesting McDonald's you'll see, or at least it's the most interesting McDonald's I've ever seen. But if that's something that makes a difference to you, then there you go. Another reason to consider a value resort at Walt Disney World is its close proximity to McDonald's. I guess. That one didn't make the list because I feel like the top 10 reasons would not include McDonald's for staying on Disney property, but it's there. So I guess this is now a 12 reasons why you should consider Walt Disney World Value Resort for your next trip. So I guess with that being said, we will leave you with these, well, it was supposed to be 10 reasons, but 12 reasons. But trust me, there are countless other reasons to consider staying at a value resort for your next Disney trip. We love each and every Walt Disney World resort, but I've had some wonderful trips while staying at the values, and I look forward to many more. With all of that being said, we will close out this episode and start working on the next one. Like I said in the introduction, we are primarily a Hershey Park show, but we love Disney and I can talk about the parks all day. So we are definitely going to continue having Walt Disney World content in the episode rotation, and maybe we will get on a set schedule here soon, but let us know what you think. Do you want more Walt Disney World content from us? Do you want regularly scheduled Disney content from us? I don't know exactly what we're going to schedule for our content releases, but I do know that we have a lot more Disney World content in the works, so please stay updated with us by our channel, our podcast feed, and our Instagram, all by searching Theme Park Society. Let us know what you think, and we will talk again real soon.